Welcome to the special meeting of Planning Commission for the City of Glendale for June 25th. May we please have a roll call?
Planning Commissioners Lee,
Here.
Manukian,
Here.
Saturian,
Here.
Shabazian,
Here.
and Chairperson Astorian.
Here. Report regarding posting the agenda, Ms. Butler.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, June 13th, 2018 on the bulletin board outside City Hall and on the city's website.
Very good. So please follow me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion? So moved. Do I need a roll call?
No, if we have a motion and a second, we're fine.
Very good. We don't have any oral communications. I believe, Mrs. Stevenson, your card was filled out. I believe you are going to be speaking about the South Glendale Community Plan? Okay. For South Glendale, or is it the oral communication? Well, if it's not on the agenda, you can. If you want to talk about something that is not on the agenda, you're more than welcome to do so. But if you want to talk about something with the agenda, you fill out a card, and then hopefully I'll call your name. Right? Very good. Thank you. All right. So let's go on to zoning appeals. I see none. We don't have any old planning commission items, or do we? We don't. So we will go promptly to Mr. Cross and Ms. Stotler.
Yeah. Okay, this item is the South Glendale Community Plan. We have a description on the staff report. It includes the proposed South Glendale Community Plan, land use element amendment, circulation element amendment, downtown specific plan boundary change amendment, and amendments to the land use map and zoning map to implement the community plan. A final IR was prepared for the project and will be presented for certification prior to any action on the project. So for tonight, as part of the environmental review, we'll be asking for your recommendation that City Council certify the final EIR. And then we're asking also that the Planning Commission consider and provide recommendations to the City Council, not only on the final EIR, but also on the South Glendale Community Plan, South Glendale Community Plan, land use element text amendments, circulation element amendment, downtown specific plan map boundary changes, land use element map amendment, and the zoning map amendment. And I just want to make it clear in terms of the downtown specific plan, we know we've had a lot of discussion with the City Council. They adopted a moratorium. So actually we're including it as part of the description because it's included in the final EIR, but we're not actually going to ask you for a recommendation on that tonight, simply because we know Council's essentially taken it off the calendar while they study the downtown specific plan independently. And then we also have, as part of the budget that will take effect next month, we do have a comprehensive update that's proposed for the circulation element. So we would not ask you to take action on a circulation element regardless of what you do with the community plan, simply because the land use element would be, because it's already budgeted, we know we're going to be looking at it. Any action you would recommend on the South Glendale Community Plan would be undertaken to implement that as part of the comprehensive circulation element update. So with that, I have a presentation. It's going to be, I'm sorry, it's quite long, but we're going to give you a thorough overview of what the proposals are, how the community plan's organized, the comments and activities we've done so far, and then hopefully we'll organize it so it'll be easy for you to give a recommendation to council on this item. I guess.
How long do you think the presentation will take?
We have 80 slides. I'll go fast.
Hey, the only reason I'm saying this is because this commission looked at the entire presentation, not way back, but in recent history, right? So we remember a whole lot of it.
Right, but we also want to make sure that anybody who views this at home has an ability. This may be the first the hearing that they're seeing. We want to make sure that they have complete information. I know not all the council or commission members were always here at all the items, so we want to make sure that everybody is brought up to speed and is operating from the same base of information.
Thank you.
Okay. So we talk about the community plan. We're looking at the area essentially south of the 134 freeway in Glendale.
May I ask for the maybe lights? Thank you.
And you'll see it also includes part of the downtown specific plan area. So you'll see there's a small area of the community plan that does go north of the freeway. That's the area that is presently within the downtown specific plan. At this point, we're not proposing any changes to the downtown specific plan, but it is an included project within the South Glendale area. Between 2014 and 2016, City of Glendale received grants from Metro to prepare a Tropico Center plan and to do the environmental impact report. So what you're seeing today, the environmental impact report, it was prepared with funding from Metro. And as part of their funding agreement, the grant agreement, we're supposed to do a Tropico Center plan. It gives us transit-oriented development policies, or TOD policies. So what we're seeking is, at least as part of the environmental document, is to have the Tropico Center plan for transit-oriented development. We'd like you to adopt that. We have a couple of pages in there, 10 pages that the Metro has asked us to modify in the Tropico Center plan to be consistent with the South Glendale Community Plan. Essentially, the Metro liked our policies, so we're including them in the Tropico plan. Then we would be asking you to certify or recommend certification of the final EIR, and then also to give us direction to actually implement the TOD, the Transit-Oriented Development Zoning, for the Tropico Center. And we would be asking you to do that even if we don't take action on the South Glendale Community Plan. At least the Tropico Center study does stand alone. We did get funding for that alone. We don't want to lose our grant. We don't want to be non-compliant with the grant. So that's why I'm pointing that out to you, that that is important for us. It's important for council. So we just want to raise your awareness of that, because I know a lot of people have been asking, why are you pushing this? Why are you taking this so soon? It's because our grant runs out in July. And so we definitely want to have our final EIR certified by that time, because that is our deadline for a grant requirement on the EIR. We also have neighborhood and district growth to 2040. That's included in our plan, the community plan. So you think of it as a policy document. Where do we want to go as we grow in the future? In and of itself, the plan it is part of the general plan, but it doesn't change the zoning. It doesn't change our land use element maps. Those would be subsequent actions, and I'll go over those in a little bit. But one thing the policies in the community plan do is they would expand our transit-oriented development, first mile, last mile issues, design issues. Those policies would be citywide eventually, but right now, the South Glendale Community Plan would implement those throughout South Glendale. Council identified the project on 3 alternatives that were studied in the EIR over 3 meetings in summer of 2016. We had public scoping and outreach meetings. In the fall of 2016, we had over 15 different public outreach meetings in addition to the scoping. We prepared the final EIR and the South Glendale Community Plan, incorporating a lot of those comments that we received. We continued our public outreach at different city events over 2017 while the EIR was being prepared. We had a 60-day public review for the EIR between January and March 2018. The comment period closed on March 12th. And since that time, we've been preparing comments to the final EIR. Eric will go over theirs in a minute. We also had board and commission outreach. So we met with the Planning Commission, Transportation Parking Commission, Design Review Board, Historic Preservation Commission, Library Arts and Culture, and then Community Service, Parks and Recreation Commission. All of them have provided comments to you, and those are included in the staff report. And we also have our DEIR response to comments, and those just come out. Those are posted on the city's website, and they're provided to you for your consideration tonight. This is what the council adopted project is. When you see the areas that are shown in yellow, those are essentially areas we're not proposing any change. We want to just maintain land use. Those are predominantly our residential neighborhoods. And it's not only single family, but also multifamily residential neighborhoods. The area you see that's crosshatched, those are proposed affordable housing overlay. Should transit be increased along our corridors, We would be proposing in the future, once transit is in and available, that we look at rezoning one block on either side of our corridors for R1250, that would be our high-density residential zones. I would point out that those corridor areas right now, they're all zoned multifamily. A long time ago, we had a down zoning in 1986, so some of those areas were actually built at designations that's higher than R1250 now. But should your recommendations go forward, then this would, and it includes any kind of affordable housing overlay, this would be the area that we would be looking at bumping up residential zoning. Other than that, we would not be touching residential zoning as part of this project. When we look at enhance and transform, this would be the areas that are in pink and in orange. Those are essentially our corridors, and this is where we're looking at putting the majority of our growth. So down here we look at the Tropico Center. Again, this is what we got our grant for transit-oriented development. We would be looking at densities in here that would be transit-oriented densities. Those would be densities greater than 35 dwelling units per acre. And then we would be looking at extending our transit up and down. I lost my, there we go. Our transit opportunities that would be up and down Central and then along our other major corridors. Brand Boulevard, Glendale Avenue, San Fernando Road, and then east-west we'd be looking at Broadway and then also Colorado. We're also looking as part of the project expanding a new rail car and streetcar, and that would be from the Metrolink station northward up to Glen Oaks and then on out to the railroad station. We also have accommodations for future expansion of rapid bus service, whether that's going to be somewhere on Broadway or if it's going to be on Colorado. It could even be on along the freeway. We don't know yet, so we're leaving the door open that this may happen. And again, if the transit comes, then we would be looking at making changes or suggesting changes to the zoning and land use designations. We also include space 120, space 134. That would be the area that would be on the freeway. We're looking at a freeway cap. That's also included as part of the project that we studied. We're also looking at expansion on the rail corridor. We know that they're looking at high-speed rail and increasing Metrolink service. Not only do we have commuter service, but they would be looking at expanding it to have local service. So like we have in New York, we have express trains that are for commuters going far, and they don't have as many stops, but then you also have local service where you would increase the number of stops, and it would have more of a local service bent. So it would actually serve more of a transit need, not just a commuter need, should that be extended. And then we also have a placeholder then should expansion of rail happen. Again, whether this would be a rail or a bus line, we don't know, but expansion east-west connections along the 134 freeway, that's also included as part of the project that we're studying. So project items, again, we're going to be asking for recommendations on the final EIR, on the South Glendale Community Plan, on our land use element amendment, a circulation element amendment, the Tropico study plan. Again, that would be the Metro project that they've asked us to amend. We want to make sure that we suggest and recommend that you adopt that as part of any recommendation you would do for the final EIR. Again, pointing out that there is an affordable housing overlay included as part of the community plan. Right now we had a DSP boundary change. Again, that's in the final EIR. It is part of the project description, even though we will be recommending you not take action on it. I want to make sure everybody is aware that it was reviewed in the EIR. It is described, even if we're not currently asking for action on it today. And then we also have a small area. We have 6 lots zoned C33. C33 gives you a 90-foot height limit. The concern is that we would want to reduce that height. This is area along just north of the City Hall here. We're looking along Wilson Avenue, and we're asking that the height limit be lowered. One of those lots that's zoned C33 is actually developed with an apartment building that's zoned the rest of the building is zoned R1250. We're asking that that zoning be brought in conformance to R1250. So again, just to point out that the South Glendale Community Plan doesn't in and of itself implement anything. It's a policy document.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Do you want to take questions as we go along if Planning Commission has got questions, or you want us to wait till you're done?
If you would wait till I'm done, because I might answer your question as I run through the different entitlements. And I know this is elementary for some of you, but I do want to make sure that the public is aware this is a large project and not everybody understands it. It is complicated. So I know it seems pretty basic, but I promise I'll get into more information that hopefully will be germane to your decision tonight. So when you go into how the community plan is actually organized, this is the community plan cover. You can get a copy on the city's website. We've had it posted for several months. The plan is organized into a chapter 1, that's introduction. Chapter 2, that's a community vision. Chapter 3, citywide principles, for those who are familiar with the city's long-range plan that we did back in 2006. These are the principles that were established in 2006, is how do those citywide principles apply to South Glendale? Then chapter 4, and this is really the heart, this is the community and the community plan, where we're actually talking about what's going on in each of these different neighborhoods throughout the city. We have over 20 neighborhoods and districts identified. This is really the heart of where our policies are, and this is where we really encourage you to focus your attention on how things can change, how we're looking at making a community more livable, because that's the majority of what these policies are. And Chris will give you an overview in a second of how the different neighborhoods and districts are described. We also have policy framework. In Chapter 5, since the land use element was adopted back in 1977, we've had over 30 different projects that we've looked at in South Glendale. What this document does is combine all those projects into one tool. You can look at the community plan, understand what all those old projects are. If you have a question about any individual project, they're described in Chapter 5. And then we have Chapter 6, implementation. And as I said, the community plan is just policy. How do you actually implement it? Should it be adopted? That's what Chapter 6 is. And then we have a number of appendices. We have, again, the Tropico Center plan. That's the Metro plan. We have a description of our past plans, historic context, historic resource survey. We have our land use map, zoning map, Greener Glendale sustainability concepts that are incorporated throughout the community plan. When we get to Chapter 6, I will ask Chris to start giving an overview of how the community plan is organized.
You can see from this map, the zoning map, that South Glendale is made up of a large variety of land uses. And in Chapter 4, we're providing a vision for the future of the identified places to try to give some sense of organization and clarity to Chapter 4 and to the plan. We've organized it into 4 sections based on development type. They're centers, corridors, neighborhoods, and districts. So centers are concentrated development that's radiating outwards, and we have identified land use types of downtown, an urban center, a town center, and a village center, from the highest density to the lowest. Corridors, or a linear pattern of development, such as a street. We've identified mixed use, high and low, Main Street, and/or neighborhood and commercial, a suburban corridor, an industrial and/or creative corridor, and also the Grand Boulevard of cars. Neighborhoods, which are probably our largest land use type in South Glendale, and are defined, by the existing neighborhoods, include the multifamily, single-family, and single-family hillside. And then districts are for a specialized land use, such as a campus, a cemetery, civic, recreation and open space, and transportation. So those are the 4 sections by development type that are in Chapter 4. And then just to give you a sense of how each of those sections is then organized, it has an opening page. I'll just show you centers. So there's an introductory page that gives you a definition of what a center is, and then it lists the 4 types of centers, and it gives you an image that helps to depict the sense of scale and density of that type of development. And then on the right-hand side is a map color-coded to the land use designation that shows you the distribution of those centers or corridors or whatever it might be, and their name. And then taking the lowest density land use as an example, the village center, there's one page or a 2-page spread that describes that land use designation. So it'll have a village center, it'll have its land use designation, its density and height. It'll have a description of what a village center is. And then it has itemized the characteristics, typical characteristics that you can anticipate seeing in a village center land use. And then the imagery that's provided is to, again, give you some kind of pictorial reference point so that, again, you get a sense of what a village center should feel like. On the right-hand side is a graphic, an illustration that gives you a sketch idea of that. In this case, you can see a small commercial area that's surrounded by the residential units. Following that would be the places in South Glendale that are identified as village centers. In this case, we have Adams Square, and we also have Columbus School. Each of those places would have a two-page spread that includes a description of, as it exists today, what does Columbus School look like? It gives you a map that shows the boundaries and key points, circulation patterns, historic buildings or districts, any key features in that area. And then on the right-hand side is where we provide the vision for the future. So you see an existing photo, and then from that same vantage point, the illustration gives you a sense of what the vision for the future would be. And below that is a description of what that would include, as well as the MET, Maintain, Enhance, Transform, evaluation that we saw for that location. So you have the introductory page of the land use. You have the places that are that land use, and then you would have all of the design guidelines for that land use designation. We start with public improvements. These are guidelines that we recommend for that neighborhood and for that land use. We again show in an order from what we see as maybe the most important, following down to the least. At most, there would be 7 bullet points. And then there's an image targeting, bulleting, and highlighting that in the image to tie it back. And that's followed then by the design guidelines that include our site planning, mass and scale, and design and detailing. And these are the guidelines that we use in doing design review on projects that are submitted. So again, what we're trying to do is, in design and detailing, what is the most important feature that a project in this area should have, bulleting that with giving imagery so that there's some kind of reference point. And then the idea is that each of these land use designations and these subsequent pages can be pulled out of this very daunting book. You know, there's a lot there, and so they can just extract those pages, you know, roughly 12 pages, and reference those rather than having to go to different locations to find the information.
Then we get on to the next part of the plan where we talk about the Tropico area. This is, again, really the genesis of the plan was we got the grant, how are we going to do mixed use in Tropico? And I would point out that we have a major employer in the area, Glendale Memorial. As part of the zoning we'll go over in a little bit, you'll see that we've tried to accommodate what their needs are for future expansion out to 2040, as well as just how do we make the area walkable and include our policies. As part of those policies we're looking at is policies that maintain neighborhood character, create walkable streets. We're looking at sidewalk standards, pedestrian safety, infill housing development. We're looking at bike lanes and hubs, transit-adjacent housing, streetscape improvements, and then obviously being a transit-oriented plan, we're looking at transit service and amenities. And I would also say that would also include bicycles and peds, as well as just buses. We're also looking at Space 134. Space 134 is a separate project. It's being studied separately right now by council. So one of the questions that comes up when you're talking about new use, what kind of changes are you talking about? How would you implement that? So I would direct you to take a look at we have some appendices as part of the community plan. This might help you understand what we're proposing to do. Take a look at Appendix D and Appendix E. Appendix D is where the neighborhoods are, and then Appendix E is actually how we're proposing that they be implemented. And I'll go through quickly. When we're looking at our downtown, this would be centers, would be the DSP. We're not proposing any changes. But our urban center is, and the urban center, this would be our transit-oriented development neighborhood. We're looking at development that would go 87 to 100 units per acre. The 100 units per acre would be where the hospital is. For Town Center 2, that would be a proposed zoning mixed use 2. Again, this is in the future. The plan itself doesn't do any of this. We would all have to implement it separately, but this is what we're studied. Looking at maximum density, 43 dwelling units to acre, 4 stories or 50 feet in height. For those of you who are familiar with our multifamily zoning, if you look at R1250 with 90 feet of frontage, the maximum density is 43 dwelling units per acre. So it is pretty consistent with what we already have in terms of density, but not necessarily for height and for stories. For Village Center, we're proposing a maximum of 35 dwelling units per acre, 3 stories and 50 feet high. And we'll show you where those are as part of our proposal. For urban study, for the urban center, again, this would be the TOD. Question is this an up zone or down zone? Well, it really depends where your property is located. Right now, it would be a up zone if you're in areas that are currently C3 or IMUR, and you're next to residential. But if you're not next to residential, then it would be a down zoning. And again, we have a locational aspect to our zoning code. It really is, it's site specific. It depends what lot you're on and what your neighboring zoning is as far as allowable heights and densities in our mixed use zones right now. Our proposed TOD, this would be the hospital itself. This would be an up zone. We're looking at 100 dwelling units per acre. That would be the high that you would have under SFMU if you're not adjacent to residential, but that would be an up zone for the property. We're also looking at a 200-foot height limit. Again, it's because the hospital has to do an expansion. We actually did a variance for Glendale Adventist for their tower. I believe that was 190 feet, so we figured this is pretty commensurate with that. For hospital expansion, we want to definitely accommodate the hospital as they have to comply with state requirements to upgrade. And for Town Center, this would be proposed along Pacific Avenue Gateway. This would be right at Pacific Avenue 134 Freeway. We're also looking at Pacific Edison. Again, you can see that on the map D if you're looking for the areas. We're proposing that to be a maximum of 43 dwelling units per acre, 4 stories or 50 feet in height. It would be in areas that right now, an upzone right now for areas that are zone 2250 and C3 when they have less than 90 feet of frontage. Otherwise, it's pretty much a wash in terms of if they're going to develop the residential use, because our 1250 with 90 feet of frontage is 43 dwelling units to the acre. Where it is a change would be the number of stories. That would be an increase. And one of the things we want to do with our mixed use is actually, we have mixed use zoning right now as part of C3, but the problem is if anybody wants to build it, we have to have residential standards complied with. That makes it useless to do mixed use without having variances. So we want to rewrite our mixed use code so you can actually build what we say you can build into the densities we say you can build it. And again, I see a question, but I'll come back to it. We also have Village Center. We're looking for that to be mixed use 1. Essentially, this would be the areas we're thinking they're adjacent to residential neighborhoods. This is more walkable areas. We're proposing a maximum of 35 dwelling units per acre. That's, again, commensurate with the R1250 standards. 3 stories, again, commensurate with R1250 standards, and 50 feet in height. That blends in well with C31. So areas that are zone C1, that would be, or R1250, that could actually be sort of considered an upzone because for R1250 you can have an additional height of it's 50 feet. On our corridors, we're looking at having mixed use high. We're proposing 50 units per acre, 6 stories or 60 feet. Mixed use low, again 43 acres, 5 stories, 50 feet. Main Street neighborhood commercial along the corridors, maximum 35 feet, 3 stories 50 feet. Again, that's very similar to our C3. For suburban, we're not proposing any changes to those land use. Industrial creative, no changes. Brown Boulevard of Cars, no change. The zoning would remain as is. Again, mixed-use high corridors, where would those be? We're proposing them on East Colorado Gateway, South Central, West Broadway, and West Colorado, and you can see those on your Appendix D. It shows where those neighborhoods are. With the proposed MX3 zones, that would actually be a down zone for the areas that are currently zoned SFMU if they're not next to a residential development. If they are next to residential development, they already have a height limit and density reduction. Although I would point out that the areas, especially on East Broadway, it is down zoning, or West Broadway rather. I take it back. West Broadway, it's a down zoning, and West Colorado. Areas that are out not on those two, not West Broadway and West Colorado, would actually be an up zone. So that would be East Broadway, East Colorado Gateway, and South Central. For our mixed-use low designation that would be implemented through MX2 zone, we're proposing that on East Colorado and South Glendale between Palmer and Cerritos. We would be allowing, for some of those properties, we'd be allowing a greater height, although not necessarily a change in the density. If your lot's narrower than 90 feet, it could be considered an increase or an up zone. And then Main Street commercial, this would be MX1, again, 35 feet, 30 stories, 50 feet in height. It's essentially our C3 zone. Under our MX zone, we would be reducing densities for properties that are C3 with greater of 90 feet of frontage, because right now they have 43 dwelling units per acre. We would be proposing 35 dwelling units per acre. And then it would be a height increase for those properties zone C2 and C1, and an up zone for properties that have residential zoning. And again, along our corridors, we're not proposing any changes to the zoning along our corridors. And that would be suburban for North Glendale Avenue, industrial creative, San Fernando Road north of Colorado, and San Fernando Road south of the Pacific Curb. We're proposing no changes to the IND, IMU, and IMUR, or the Brown Boulevard of Cars. No changes proposed to the existing zoning, which is currently commercial auto. Within our residential neighborhoods, we're not proposing any changes to our multifamily residential neighborhoods. But I would point out something that we are proposing. We're proposing to create a new single-family hillside land use designation. Back in 1990, when we adopted our hillside ordinance, we adopted zoning, but we never adopted the policy to back it up as part of the general plan. So we feel that there would be an advantage to actually putting it in our general plan land use, where we talk about single-family hillside characteristics and basically put in the policies that support the zoning we've already adopted approximately, over 20 years ago. When it comes to districts, we're proposing a new campus designation. It's more of a design characteristics. When you have a large property that's under a single owner, there may be advantages, such as for a city hall, where you could have different types of uses planned over an area and coming with a separate plan to prove that. In South Glendale, we're looking at there may be a possibility that Glendale Community College may want to do that for their properties. Cemetery, we're not proposing any changes at all to Forest Lawn. For civic designation, this would be new. We're looking at putting this on city and school district properties. We're not proposing to change the zone, but we're proposing to change the general plan. At some time in the future, somebody may want to create a new zone to address the uses that are actually on those properties. Recreation and open space, no change. And then we're looking at a transportation designation. We're not changing the zoning for that, but we actually didn't designate it in the areas where we have a lot of transportation corridors, so we would be seeking to rectify that and putting a transportation designation along our freeways and also along our rail corridor. And then we have Eric Krause, who will provide an overview of the environmental impact report.
This could be a time if you guys want to ask any questions about the plan specifically, then we can start talking about the AR. If you guys want to start into some questions.
I have some questions. And I'll pick out the one that the last one that you talked about. Why are we downzoning the SFMU areas in the districts?
At the time, we were studying what the area would look like under the development proposals. We were working with Alan Loomis, and he had an urban design issue that a lot of what we're seeing coming in those areas for mixed use are affordable housing developments. Every single one of the ones that we see coming in is asking for additional height. So his concern was that if you already have that higher density, then we come in, somebody comes in and they ask for affordable housing densities, you have an increase in height even above and beyond what it was already designated. So from an urban design perspective, Alan was concerned that the height was not compatible with the rest of the neighborhood, and so his suggestion is that we look at downzoning those town centers, because those are areas where we want to have it more walkable, more intimate, not as what I think of as a drive-by experience. He wanted to actually have it where a town center would be consistent with town centers citywide. The other town center we have is up there in Montrose. And so the idea is, if you're going to have a walkable neighborhood, if it's too tall, it doesn't lend itself well to that. And if somebody is actually going to build affordable housing, they can get the additional height anyway to what was already proposed or is currently in effect right now. So that's why he had a recommendation to do that, and that's just carried over today.
So regardless of the downzoning, for affordable housing, it isn't as if we have a lot of it, right? And if we have an area that we can do it, that's not going to affect the number of the affordable housing units.
They can still come in and, right, they're still absolutely 100% available to do a density bonus, just like they could anywhere in the city. So even if they do downzone that, no, they can go above that and beyond for affordable housing.
So let me ask you about the Pacific Avenue corridor.
Yeah.
This specifically is designed for the property right adjacent to the freeway, the Edison Pacific? Or is it? You know, their transportation yard and their
Yeah, this would be essentially the area that's right along where the Pacific curve is in the area north. It's also the area where Metro is proposing to do a flyover. So that's part of their project that they're looking. It's right in that area. So you'll see that we tried to accommodate that. You'll see it in the graphic for the Pacific Edison neighborhood that we have that built in. We don't know which direction they're going to go because it's not our project, but we were trying to at least address the fact that it could occur.
So this is not going to be spot zoning, Ms. Stadler?
No, because you have a large community that we're looking at doing it. It's multiple blocks.
So it's not done for the
it's
purpose of that large parcel adjacent to the freeway, is my concern.
Oh, Pacific Avenue Gate. I was looking at Pacific Edison. Oh, Pacific Avenue Gateway. No, it's multiple parcels in there. It does include an area that's by the freeway, but it's well beyond that. It includes multiple parcels. So it's not just one. No, it's multiple.
Very good. I got that.
I'm concerned now.
No.
Are you looking here?
No, it's further up.
Okay.
Now, you talked about the downtown.
So you mean the Days End? When you're talking about the large parcel, you're
Across
talking
the
about the Days End or the one that's the AT&T facility, right? It includes all that area.
was Pacific Bell and then AT&T.
Exactly. I believe we took it all the way to Kenilworth. I don't have the name on it, but I believe it's Kenilworth. Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you another question, and I have some comments about these two properties across from Pacific Avenue. You stated that downtown Pacific boundaries will not be changed, but the changes are just tweaking. It's not, again, a wholesale extension of downtown Pacific plan, correct?
Yeah, the proposal that we got originally was to look at approximately 20 properties that were right adjacent to the DSP, and every time anybody came in with development that was next to it, a lot of times these were properties that were zoned R1250 with a parking overlay, and somebody would come in with a development including more than, from the DSP, including more than just parking. And so they were coming out on a project-by-project basis. We said, well, here's an opportunity. Do you want to just change everything, expand the boundaries of the DSP so you'll know that anything that has split zone, a property owner may own two properties adjacent to each other, one inside the DSP, one outside. Do you want to just change it, include all of it in the DSP? Direction was very clear from council, no. they don't want to address it. So right now, it is in the EIR. There is a description in the EIR, but we've been told very specifically not to include any action on the DSP boundary change as part of the South Glendale community at this time, plan at this time. Because, I mean, when we started the process, it was back in 2016, so it's only been since April that they've started talking about it and instituted a special study, and there's right now a moratorium on residential development in that area.
Good. I did not hear anything about inclusionary housing in your South Glendale community plan.
Inclusionary housing right now is being studied as a separate issue, but inclusionary would absolutely be applicable to anything that goes on depending on what council adopts. So I don't know what the ultimate plan they're going to adopt is, but inclusionary housing is something that would absolutely affect South Glendale should it go in. And again, our policy document here it's just a policy. It's not actually implementing any change at this time in zoning. We're not changing land use elements. We would be coming back to you subsequently with that. By that time, we should have direction on inclusionary housing, unless Eric has more information if anything's happened more recent.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Philip Lansfame, Director of Community Development. We are studying inclusionary housing. Don't know at this time where it would be. It could be as much as citywide. It could be focused in one area, say the downtown specific plan area. We are now just looking at nexus analysis. We'll be bringing that back to the council for some initial direction on the 31st of July. At that point, we'll ask them, where do you want to have this piece, inclusionary housing? Where do you want it to apply? And we'll get some direction there. But as Laura said, we're actually studying it as part of the DSP review that we're currently doing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cross.
If there's no further questions, then I'll kind of get into the EIR discussion. This is a lot of what you guys had heard in the past, with some different discussion in terms of how the final EIR was prepared. So the South Glendale Community Plan is prepared as a program EIR. This analyzes the development envelope because we don't really know specific parcel level by parcel level where the development would occur. Some of the advantages of the program EIR, it allows lead agencies to consider broad alternatives and programs and wide mitigation measures that would apply to the entire plan area. And it would ensure consideration of cumulative impacts because those would all be discussed as part of the EIR review. So the project actions that were reviewed in the EIR was the general plan amendment, which included land use element, the circulation element, which we've heard that we will be discussing and reviewing later on as we move forward with our comprehensive update for that plan. An adoption of the community plan, and then again the amendments of DSP boundary, which were no longer a consideration of the South Glendale plan, and any zone changes that we discussed in terms of the C3 zoning, and any future zone change that might occur to the MX zones or the TOD zone should the City Council decide to proceed with those. There was a historic resource survey that was attached to both the specific plan, or the community plan, and also the EIR, and that included an evaluation of over 8,500 properties that were built prior to 1980. And so essentially the plan itself that was the map, that's the council-directed project that we looked at in the downtown South Glendale Community Plan, EIR. Some of the characteristics includes the area south of the 134 that includes about 3,000 acres. We looked at approximately 10,300 residential dwelling units, 3.7 million square feet of non-residential development, and that would equate to about 2,800 new increase in population, which is based on a 2.7 persons per household. That was based on SCAG's projections. Yeah, 28,000. Okay. Did I say 2,800? Okay, much more than that. Some of the significant unavoidable impacts that were found out and when we did the environmental impact analysis was to aesthetics. That would be to the proposed project would substantially degrade existing visual character. Proposed project would result in new sources of increased shade. One of the other areas was with air quality, and there's essentially all the different resource areas and thresholds that we look at. Air quality would result in significant unavoidable impacts, and greenhouse gas emissions was significant unavoidable. Population housing due to the increase in population, which would exceed SCAG's forecast, and then also with public services and recreation. And traffic impacts, we looked at 50 intersections in the plan area. 27 of those would be impacted to significant unavoidable, either during the AM or PM peak period. 22 of those could be mitigated to less than significant. Some of the alternatives we looked at in the EIR was the no project alternative, which is a requirement of CEQA, a downtown tropical center plan alternative, and then East Broadway, South Central Avenue development alternative. The no project alternative is essentially what would be built under the existing general plan, and we anticipate by 2040 up to approximately 2,600 dwelling units, 2.5 million square feet of non-residential development, which would equate to a population increase of about 7,000 residents. And so all the resource areas that we talked about, the 7 resource areas, would still remain significant and unavoidable under the no project alternative, although to a lesser level than the proposed project. And then when we looked at alternatives, you equate that against the project objectives and whether or not those would be obtained with the alternatives themselves, and the no project would not fulfill any of the project objectives. Alternative 2 was a reduced project, and that is basically includes the downtown, which is already kind of one of our center areas, and then the TOD Tropical Center Plan. And then that would equate to approximately 5,400 to 7,400 dwelling units, population increase of 14,500 and up to about 20,000 residents. And that would actually reduce one of the impacts to less than significant, although 6 would remain significant unavoidable, although to a lesser level. The third alternative is the East Broadway South Central Avenue development. That's approximately 7,400 to 9,400 dwelling units, 20,000 to 25,000 increase in residents, and that would get us down to a reduction in 2 of the significant unavoidable impacts. So we end up with 5 resource areas still SU. The environmental superior alternative CEQA requires us to select one other than the project. That would be alternative 2 in the EIR. As part of the final environmental impact report, it does include the draft EIR in its entirety. That's why the document is quite large. And that also Chapter 8 responds to comments received and responses to the comments. Chapter 9 is changes to the draft EIR. And those changes essentially were minor changes to air quality and cultural resource mitigation measures, which were just amplified and clarified. There were some additions to air quality based on some comments we got from the AQMD, so we added some measures to that. And then also the amendments to the Tropical Center Plan. Some of the comments we received comments from State Clearinghouse, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and the Glendale Unified District. Those were the agency comments. Some of the organizations was the Royal Canyon Property Owners Association, Glendale Rancho Neighborhood Association, Abundant Housing LA, and the Adams Hill Neighborhood Association, and Whiting Woods Property Owners Incorporated, as well as the U.S. Route 6 Tourist Association, and the Carpenters Contractors Cooperation Committee. Then we received 53 additional individual comment letters that were all responded to as part of the EIR. And earlier last week, I did email you guys 2 additional comment letters that were omitted from the EIR accidentally. So that was letter number 63 and also some responses to oral communications we heard at our March 7th Planning Commission meeting. The next steps for the EIR would be, this is what we're asking Planning Commission to recommend to City Council, would be the certification of final environmental impact report, need to adopt a finding of facts, and that would support adoption of a statement of overriding considerations, as well as a mitigation monitoring reporting program that's currently being prepared, and that will be completed prior to going to the City Council. I believe Laura was going to talk a little bit more about some of the other funding.
Yeah, just that we mentioned that we have a grant funded by Metro. It's The two grants together are up to $500,000, so this is why we're very concerned about making sure that we meet our grant requirements. As part of our Appendix C in the Tropico plan, or in the community plan, you'll see our Tropico Center plan. And you'll see as part of the staff report, we did have about approximately 10 pages in that plan that we're proposing to amend again for consistency purposes. And then those amendments were requested by Metro to make sure that there's consistency between the community plan and the Tropico Center plan. And when we ask for recommendations on the final EIR, we'll actually be asking as well for recommendations for adoption of the Tropico Center plan.
No, I'm not, those, we're going to skip over the next couple of EIR slides. They're essentially repeating some of the same things that I already discussed.
Okay. All right. Then when we get to the South Glendale Community Plan also.
Let us ask some questions from Mr. Cross.
Sure.
I mean, let's do this compartmentalizer. Any questions for Eric? No. I have a question for you. For example, when you look at Alternative 2 or Alternative 3, you have a number of units, 5,400 to 7,400, or even the no project that has 2,587 dwellings. Does this number include the existing units as well?
No.
Or it's anything and everything over and above what it's existing? In other words, a duplex that is existing is not counted in these numbers.
Well, the way the numbers were basically, so when we did the EIR, we looked at opportunity sites we thought would turn over within that year 2040. And so when you're looking at those different sites, then essentially the no project 2,500, so that essentially, I guess you could say, would be included with the different alternative numbers. So it's a total number of, like Alternative 2, we have a total of 5,400 to 7,400, which would include kind of those no project numbers, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if that's the question you're asking directly. But.
An existing 5-unit apartment building is not included in these numbers.
Mr. Chair, I think these would be net new units.
Okay, thank
Got
you.
you, okay.
That's what I want to hear. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the land use element, we were looking at doing updating it to match the uses in the South Glendale Community Plan. So when you look at the densities that we're proposing, they would match, and those would be densities for our mixed use. They would match what's actually in the community plan. And each of the different neighborhoods, you'll see that we have zoning identified and land use characteristics. So we're providing for consistency. That's why we have a land use element amendment. If you look at our existing land use element, it doesn't talk about a South Glendale Community Plan EIR. So we're looking at that. We'll be looking at adding, again, I mentioned it, the single family residential designation, civic, Brand Boulevard of cars and transportation. And I would just say, were you to take any kind of recommendation that would modify the South Glendale Community Plan, any kind of the land use, then we would also need to modify that, our proposed land use element amendment to match it. In terms of the circulation amendment, it has been budgeted, so we don't need to take action on it now because it would be included, whatever action is taken, it would be included when we update the circulation element. In terms of the downtown specific plan, council's taken this off, so we're not going to be making any change to that since our council gave us direction, but we want to let you know it is in the EIR. If you certify the EIR, it would be part of what's certified, so anything that goes in a future action would be separate from South Glendale Community Plan. In terms of the C3 zoning, this would be the 6 lots that council asked us to study separately. These are the areas between Isabel and Jackson on Wilson, and we discussed those before. It's essentially modifying the zoning to keep the uses exactly as they are now. Right now, 5 of the lots are developed with commercial buildings, and one of them is developed with an apartment. So the zoning that we're proposing would match exactly what's out there. And here's just a short description of it, 6 properties. And again, not only would be changing the zoning, but we would also change the land use element to match it. So the area that would be our 1250 would be residential high from commercial, and then the area that would be, we would actually have our commercial services zone that we're not proposing any changes to it, but we would, except for that one lot that would be moved to our residential high. And then with that, here's our recommended actions. Because I know
Laura,
there's
before we go there, The 6 properties, does that include the Glendale Unified School District campus as well?
No,
Okay.
makes no changes to any of their property at all.
Okay.
So I know there's a lot of actions that we're asking for you to do. That's why we tried to separate our presentation to kind of isolate them. So hopefully it's clear. We're looking for recommendation regarding certification of the final EIR. We're looking for a recommendation about adoption of the Tropico Center plan with amended pages to match South Glendale Community Plan. Again, that's grant. It's required by grant. We're looking that you give us direction to adopt the South Glendale Community Plan or any other alternatives related to the plan. We're looking at you give us a direction to, or council the direction to adopt the land use element amendment, or again, any alternatives or modifications that you may recommend. We're asking that we waive any action on the circulation element, waive any action on the DSP boundaries, and then we're asking for direction that you give us direction to proceed with adoption of the C33 zone changes on those 6 lots.
I believe Commissioner Leah has got a question for you.
I do have
Okay.
one question. That is, I do have one question. One of the comments that was made by Transportation and Parking Commission, I know that parking is not part of your EIR study, but they do refer to, since all these development projects as you're proposing, to have a park once concept. I guess what that means is that we need to have some sort of a city-provided parking lots in their areas. Is that something that's been referred here in your studies or anywhere else?
Yeah, the South Glendale Community Plan does talk about park once in the plan. Do you know, I believe, I don't know exactly, I just know it's also included in the Tropico study. There's a large explanation of it in the Tropico study. That's one of the concepts that Metro has been pushing, again, to get people to use transit and a lot of walking opportunities. So they want to get people out of their cars. It's definitely their interest. So to get them out of their cars, they want to park once and walk and not have individual driving trips. The other issue is we have addressed park once as far as citywide policy, not just in South Glendale, but in our citywide plans when it comes to transportation, because it's a good policy everywhere to get people off our streets. In terms of some of the options that we're looking at studying, we did include such things as perhaps putting city structures or public structures in residential neighborhoods to alleviate some of the overcrowding in some of our South Glendale neighborhoods. We've been also looking at perhaps putting parking in alleyways and things like that, creative use of some of the facilities we already have. I know that's popular in Europe where you would have alleys and streets and parking under it. Those are definitely concepts that we are looking at exploring, or at least have left the door open to explore in the community plan.
So to clarify, independent of what Metro is doing, the city is also looking at that.
Right, it is in the Metro study. We do have it in our plan, but we were looking at it at the same time Metro was looking at it. So our document is consistent with Metro's guidelines for that too.
And just for housekeeping purposes, your page, figure 3-3, you need to correct that again.
Oh.
Your Somerset and Mariposa is flip-flop.
Okay, thank you. Then the other thing we would point out in terms of the recommendation, were you to make a change, we would recommend that if you're going to make a change or not recommend adoption of the South Glendale Community Plan, that at least you would consider giving us direction, because I know one of the comments, a lot of comments that we've heard, overwhelming number of comments that we've heard, not only from the public but also from our boards and commissions, is the question of, well, can't you adopt the policies without adopting increased density? Can't we adopt something that's more of a mix of no project and alternative 2? Alternative 2 being basically just the development in the Tropico Center. And the answer is absolutely. It's up to your recommendation what you would like to do. Certification of the EIR does nothing other than allows us to use that data, but it doesn't approve anything. So we would encourage, except for our grant. So we would encourage you to consider certifying the final EIR, and then if you're of a mind that maybe the densities are fine the way they are, maybe we don't need to increase the density, but we would encourage you to at least give us direction. We can always come back and modify the community plan. So if you're interested in keeping the policy directions, we have the site planning, the public improvements, the site plan and design, all those features of Chapter 4 that really make a community plan a community. Without changing the density, you can absolutely do that. You would just want to give us direction, but I would encourage you that if you say you want us to revise our mixed-use designations without increase in density, that you consider the TOD center and exclude that and give us direction to prepare, come back to you or come back to council with a modification for a TOD zone, to create a TOD zone that would match the Tropico Center study as well as our community plan. We can return that to you at a later date. That would be our recommendation to you if you're going to incline to go that way.
Commissioner.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on your comment there. The alternative 2 has a Tropical Center and also, the upper portion of that. So if we were to do Tropical Center by itself, what would the number look like?
I'd have to look it up. I don't know that we've analyzed what the Tropico Center numbers would be if it was just Tropico Center alone. I'm going to have to look that up. I don't know.
To get that isolated, I think you should have numbers for that.
Yeah, and I don't have those right now. I would have to look. We would have to look those up.
Mr. Chairman Lee, maybe we can take a recess at some point and we can go back and take a look at what those numbers might be. I think we have those.
Let me understand the Commissioner's question. You're referring that you're under alternative 2, you're going to have increase of 5,400 to 7,400 units over and above the no project.
Correct. And the vast majority of those units that are proposed would be put in along Central, because Central has a lot of underdeveloped properties in terms of opportunity sites. Again, when we look through...
So what is it that you're going to go out in the recess and look at it?
What I asked was that instead of this alternative 2 combines this area and that area,
right.
And I just asked for what is the impact on just this
Oh,
area.
I see. Okay,
So
south side. Got it.
Right, so we have a lot of that information. We just don't have it broken down that finely, so we would have to go take a look, and we could probably get that information for you.
Mr. Lansky.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to clarify something that I thought I heard you say, that it was 54 to 7,400 units above no project. The 2,500 units in no project would be included
In
in
every
those
one of
54.
these.
Right.
So you have to
in every
subtract
one.
that out.
So in other words, if you do nothing, if we don't change any zoning at all, we know there's going to be natural growth that happens. That would be we expect about 2,500 units, changing nothing at all from what exists today.
Understood.
Net new units.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Stadler?
I think they want to take a recess to get that.
And then I would just say, if you're going to give us any kind of alternative direction on the South Glendale Community Plan, that we would, just so you know, we would automatically have to modify the land use element amendment that we're proposing just to match whatever your direction would be. So if you're giving us direction, just know that we would come back to you with a modified plan, also modified land use element amendment. We also have to, as part of implementation, again, this is in the community plan itself, this would be Chapter 6, but we do talk about options. So we have the adoption options that we're asking you for right now. That's what this would be. But then we also know in the future we'd be looking at other implementations, such as if we do mixed-use zones, we'll be coming back to you with mixed-use zoning to implement it. Because right now we just have a proposal, it's not a zone. So we would be coming back with designation and zones. We'd be coming back in with obviously we're going to do a circulation element amendment that'll be comprehensive. That'll come to you sometime when that's prepared next year or the year after. We have a small lot subdivision ordinance that's included in here that will come back. Small lot design guidelines would come at the same time. We know that we would like to see a land use element update. Right now we don't have funding for that. Obviously, if you're upgrading your circulation or mobility element, you're doing most of the work that you would need to update a land use element anyway. You have to get updated land use, get traffic counts, get uses that are out there, projected growth, all of it. They inform each other. So this would be an opportune time to do that should funding become available. We also were looking at options for creating parking lots in multifamily areas or other areas such as alleyways. That's also included in the document. Safety element update, we know we're going to have to do that anyway, just because we have an update going on right now to our local hazard mitigation plan from fire, update of Greener Glendale plan. This would be our sustainability element. We know by state laws changed, we also have to do that it's not only sustainability, but it's also adaptability, climate adaptation we would have to address. We would also need to study affordable housing overlay zone, should it be adopted like we have in the plan. Also, we know that our housing element update is coming to us in the next 2 years, so that would be another item you'd be seeing. And then we also want to, I don't know who added this one, we have a commercial small lot consolidation study. So again, just to repeat, these are the actions that we're asking, or recommendations that we're asking for you from tonight. And just putting this up just to make sure that we don't forget something as we go through tonight's deliberations and direction. So with that concludes my presentation. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I think Eric was trying to make a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. In response to Commissioner Lee's issue or discussion about Park Once, on page 4-27 of the community plan, on item D, it talks about the possibility of doing parking management and shared parking through a Park Once.
What page is that?
That's on 4-27. So that talks about doing Park Once concept in terms of, having multiple uses and that sort of thing, where you could park and then, I guess go get your hair done, go shopping, those sorts of things.
Pretty much just like the public parking structures that we have in downtown right now, that were designed
Correct.
to do just that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Is your presentation complete?
Yes.
Okay. Do you still need to take a 5-minute?
Well, I don't, if you need to have that information prior to taking public testimony, I don't know if you guys had any additional questions.
And we
that
will
might
get
have to
to
go
the
back
public
or-
before we come back with additional questions. But let's take a recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
So we will resume the Planning Commission meeting for the 25th, the special Planning Commission meeting. And I'll go back to Ms. Stadler and Eric Cross. You have some numbers for Commissioner Lee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Chairman Lee. So I was able to look through this pretty extensive spreadsheet we had about all the proposed development we think might occur by 2040. Under kind of the no project scenario, we're looking at about 1,159 units in the Tropico area versus 2,737 under the plan, both alternative 2 and 3. That's about an additional 1,578 units that we would anticipate under the Tropico plan.
But that's in the 5,400 to 7,400 number.
That's correct, yes.
You've just broken it down.
Correct.
1578?
1578, yes, sir.
And what is that in population? About 5,000?
2.7.
2.7.
Oh, for population, yeah. Yeah, it's like 4,260.
Okay.
Any other questions for the staff?
One
Commissioners?
question. Some of the letters that I read here, some of the concerns of some of residents of Glendale is about the overcrowding and the traffic issues. And I was going through the response that what the response was that based on this project. So can you just summarize it for me, that is those concerns are something that it's avoidable or something that we can manage that?
Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Chairman Satorian. I think it's hard to equate exactly kind of, because these are like generic comments we get about people just that don't want any new development in the city. So I guess I don't remember exactly which comment you're responding to or referring to, but essentially that's what the EIR would do. It would evaluate those potential impacts of that additional development. So those are kind of what we go to in terms of what the EIR analyzed and what the findings were, I guess. I'm not sure if we're really answering the question, but so in response to that, it's more like that's something that we would present to both you, the Planning Commission, and the City Council in terms of comments that we get from the public that are kind of generic enough, but don't really raise any environmental concerns outside of the fact that there's that additional population that would increase is already analyzed in the EIR, and these are the impacts that would be as a result of that. I hope that answers your question.
So you do believe that that's something that we can manage or something that it can be handled properly?
Well, in terms of the EIR, there were 7 resource areas that would be significant and unavoidable, which means we don't have the ability to mitigate those particular impacts. One of them would be population, and of course traffic, air quality, noise, those sorts of things. So we're acknowledging that, yes, that would result in impacts to this area of the city. However, there's no mitigation measure that would reduce it to less than significant levels.
I see.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's really important, though, to understand this is a study. So if those things were to happen, that would be the impact. We're not saying that that is the impact. It's if those things happen, that would be the impact. So we're asking you to look at that document and tell us, is this valid information for us to use as we evaluate projects that come forward? It's really important because we get that mistake a lot. If we approve the EIR, that means that these things are going to happen. Not necessarily. It's an information document for you and other decision makers.
Yeah, of course, on the response side, some of those concerns, I think the response was that the concerns are correct and it's valid. So it's something that you agree with the comments that was made by the public. It's not something that we are just...
Yeah, so we do recognize that comment that they raised would result in significant unavoidable impacts. I do want to point out, too, that even under the no project alternative, which would be normal growth through 2040, a lot of those impacts would still exist under the no project as well. So it's the severity would be lessened, but it wouldn't be reduced to less than significant either. So that's just a point for reference.
Any other questions for staff? All right, so I'd like to go to hear what our the public has to say about this thing. We will be giving you 3 minutes. We would like to, as we say here, be frugal, for you to be frugal with your time and generous with your comments. I'll start with Mr. Stevenson.
Good evening, Chairperson Astorian, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Randy Stevenson, President of Stevenson Real Estate Services, commercial real estate broker. My office is located at 1111 North Brand Boulevard. I've reviewed the recommendations of the South Glendale Community Plan and have some comments as it relates to the proposed zone changes to the Pacific Edison Corridor specifically. The quote-unquote vision for the area as defined in the community plan is quote-unquote transform, including the assertion that the area is, quote, attractive for larger scale mixed-use development, end quote. Of course it is. You have the existing Pacific Community Center and Park with all of its amenities, Thomas Edison Elementary School, not to mention, quote, convenient access to the 5 freeway, major arterial access along San Fernando Road, and future transit connections, end quote, which include high-speed rail and a Metrolink Eco-Rapid station. Unfortunately, this transformation will never occur because the proposed zoning for residential density in the Pacific Edison corridor is being reduced to either 50 units per acre or 43 units per acre. Let me explain how this reduction in density completely halts any transformation of the area. In the corridor, there are currently 15 parcels of land in excess of 10,000 square feet. Let's call those size parcels that are reasonably available for development. All of these properties are improved with buildings. If the properties can only be developed with 43 or 53 units per acre, and we assume that the properties, as they stand, are worth $225 per square foot for the commercial buildings that are on them, which is exceptionally conservative in this market, this means that only 2 of the 15 properties make sense for redevelopment. Not very transformative, is it? If you want to transform the area, keep the existing zoning. The area currently is mostly zoned IMU-R. If this zoning is retained, 13 of those 15 parcels are available for redevelopment, you'll see projects in the neighborhood. You'll see the neighborhood transform. One additional consideration: affordable housing can be a significant component of this evolution. In order to create affordable housing, new mixed-use projects have to be viable. If you retain the existing zoning, you encourage the possibility and the probability of the construction of new affordable housing. Please don't contradict and betray the city's written, quote-unquote, vision for this area. I urge you to modify the plan and the recommendation for the Pacific Edison corridor and keep the existing zoning to ensure that this area can blossom. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
The staff mentioned that even though it was a down zone, if you apply, even though it was a down zone, if you apply the affordable housing element there, you'll get it up to, get it back up to the incentives that you'll be getting anyways. So if the developers are encouraged to include affordable housing, even in that condition, you'll be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve for the developers. So what do you think about that?
I disagree. The existing buildings on the properties are worth far in excess of what the land value would be, even with the change in zoning and even with allowing for density bonuses when you have an affordable component. The fact of the matter is you just have too many properties. As you know, the city is well built out. Many of the properties were built before current parking requirements. So you have a significant amount of coverage with the buildings on whatever lot size it is, be it a 10,000-foot lot or a 100,000-foot lot. If you think of the area specifically, public storage isn't going anywhere. DSS isn't going anywhere. I can tell you those are the 2 of the 15 properties that are never going to see development no matter what happens with the zoning. They're just too well built. So when zoning gets reduced, even if you've got that incremental boost by including affordable housing, it doesn't get you far enough. The existing zoning does. Certainly happy to give you some numbers on it if you'd like, but I don't believe it would make a difference.
Okay. So thank you, Mrs. Stevenson. Keep that question in mind because we're going to come back to you and get some answers on that. Ms. Naira Sumbatian?
Good evening. My name is Naira Sogbatian. I'm here today as a resident and property owner in South Glendale, speaking on behalf of my HOA board and 90-plus residents and property owners.
I'm sorry, hold on. Can you, Laura, start your call? Thank you.
Sorry. Should I start
No,
again?
no, go ahead.
We all object and reject the South Glendale Community Plan in its entirety with all proposed amendments. South Glendale Community Plan comes at a time when reportedly over 6,000 units were added to the DSP area within South Glendale and many more units are in the pipeline. SGCP also comes at the time when our council members and staff have acknowledged the health and safety hazards created by the exceeding density in the DSP and adopted a moratorium on all residential developments. So the community would reasonably expect that SGCP would address the existing density problems and provide solutions to those mistakes, and yet it does the opposite. SGCP has proposed, even in its environmentally superior alternative 2, suggests adding over 5,400, 7,400 units in South Glendale and clearly states that the project and all of its alternatives will produce 7 significant environmental impacts. Nonetheless, the EIR is inadequate and does not meet CEQA requirements of good faith, reasoned analysis. When assessing the legal sufficiency of an EIR, the courts focus on adequacy, completeness, and good faith effort at full disclosure. And they look at whether the EIR is accurate, stable, and finite. A description may be inadequate if, for example, it omits substantial integral elements of a project or is internally contradictory. The EIR makes no good faith attempt to mitigate any of the impacts. In fact, the recent changes actually exacerbate those impacts. For example, in the changes to the EIR, the impact to historic resources is unreasonably limited to only the alteration or demolition of historic resources themselves, while the case law and CEQA guidelines acknowledge impacts of other neighboring projects on historic resources. Also, in the changes to EIR, Glendale B-Line is defined as a fixed local route, thereby allowing for more transit priority area. Third, the project and its alternatives propose new zones, but do not fully disclose the implications of those new zones. Only in the response to comment 57, which by the way was made by the GUSD planning staff member, the AIR discloses that civic zone for the public agencies and GUSD will allow flexibility, and therefore it may change to a mixed-use zone. If you doubt that GUSD or any other public agency will do it, just check GUSD's track record. For the past several years, they have been purchasing apartment buildings and reselling those to developers. And last time GSD was before you, it was asking you to approve a mixed-use zone change for the developer for its own property. So EIR is contradictory. While it suggests that neither the project nor its alternative will infiltrate the residential areas, it asks to change our 1250 wedding cake setbacks, to reduce those. So if we're to not infiltrate those areas, why are we changing the setbacks? It is also, my time ran out. I would really want you to consider the fact that the park and recreation is just left unattended and not responded, and this SGCP needs more work.
Thank you, Ms. Sambatian. Mr. Mohill. Mike Mohill?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Mike Mohill. Why do we want to increase the boundaries of the DSP, the Downtown Specific Plan, which is in the South Glendale Corridor, Community Plan, I'm sorry. Why do we need an additional 10,000 units in South Glendale? 10,000. Why do we need an additional 27,000 residents in South Glendale? We're already choking with traffic, aren't we? The traffic in downtown Glendale is already horrible. By 2040, there is projected 22, that's 22 traffic congested areas according to the South Glendale Community Plan. And it cannot be mitigated. Traffic already is congested at Pacific, Central, Brand, and Glendale Avenue between the hours of 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Approval of the South Glendale Community Plan will only make traffic in our city in total horrible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohill. Ms. Lorna Vartanian?
Good afternoon, Chair Historian, members of the Commission, and staff. My name is Lorna Vartanian, and I am president of the Rossmoyne Mountain Homeowners Association, a neighborhood which borders South Glendale, just north of the 134 freeway. Last month, City Council adopted a moratorium. Doesn't sound like it worked. Last month, City Council adopted a moratorium in the DSP area because, quote, the city finds that the significant and unavoidable traffic impacts, as well as other significant and unavoidable impacts that have resulted from residential development projects in the DSP represent a current and immediate threat to the public health, safety, and welfare, end quote. Before you today is a request to make a recommendation to City Council regarding the South Glendale Community Plan and its final EIR. The EIR openly identifies 7 quality of life factors: aesthetics, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, population and housing, public services, recreation, and transportation, which will be impacted at the level of unavoidable and significant with no proposed mitigation measures. The proposed plan is intended to guide neighborhood and commercial district growth to 2040. However, the negative impacts, which came to light 10 years after creation of the DSP and led to a moratorium, should not be allowed to expand in the South Glendale Community Plan, and the EIR should not be certified before the results of the DSP study are completed. The City of Glendale has met its state housing requirements except for affordable housing. Why are we increasing density? Why are we adding another 28,000 people to an area that is already overcongested and short of open space? If anything, we need inclusionary housing, and we should look at density bonus numbers that are higher than 15%. Regarding traffic impacts, the EIR states that expected impacts due to increases in vehicular traffic cannot be mitigated and notes 22 intersections, many of which will be rated F by 2040, for which no feasible mitigations are identified. This is an open admission that car traffic is not going away and must be addressed. Finally, parks and open space must be a priority for the overall health and well-being of the community. Why is the city unable to make meaningful open space a priority for South Glendale? Is it NIMBYism? The community is already unhappy with what has happened within the soon-to-be expanded boundaries of the DSP. The proposed plan and its alternatives are over-aggressive. Without further studies, the only acceptable recommendation now is for a no-project alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Catherine Yorka? I got your last name correctly this time.
Did. Thank you very much, Chair Astorian and members of the Planning Commission. I've been scribbling remarks during this meeting. I want to thank staff for a very clear and cogent and thorough presentation. I realized that I think Lorna Vartanian really said what I wanted to say. And so apart from pointing out that I very much support transit-oriented development. I work in I work in Pasadena, and much of what's gone on there around the light rails, I think highly of. I think it's a problem that we're thinking of transit-oriented development around things like bus lines and a rail that does not have the kind of service that you get out of an integrated and frequent light rail system. Buses in particular, I think the fact we have buses that run very frequently from the depot up to Glen Oaks along Brand Boulevard. The fact that the city is contemplating spending $100 million on replacing them or supplementing them with a streetcar, I think makes my point for me. It's very difficult to overcome public resistance to buses. And I say this as someone who takes them and does not have to stand on them. But apart from that, I just would echo what Ms. Vartanian said. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Amy Di Domenico? Is that correct? Yes. Di Domenico.
I'm a homeowner, and this is my first time at a meeting, and I want to be more involved because I see the results. I've seen the results of what these meetings do, and I want to say I want to thank you for what you do, but I also want to point out I'm very disappointed in the planning department with Glendale because I feel like for people like myself who don't understand all of the verbiage from the decks and everything, when we have someone who speaks for the letters from just the regular citizens, and we have somebody who dismisses them and says they're general comments of people who don't want to see change, I think that really puts us where we're at. We're all very smart people, but I think when we lose the spirit of the people who live and the history of a city, we're in jeopardy of what that city can fall to. And when I hear things about the transportation in New York City, I'm from New York. I came to California for the great things it offers, which is greenery. My house butts up against Forest Lawn. 2 years ago when there was Forest Lawn expansion, the other day they took down, or in the process of taking down, 9 old-growth California trees. They're 100 years old. They're replacing them by 24 box-inch trees. That'll take a long time to create a canopy that houses all of the birds, all of the beautiful ecosystem there, and also the breeze that makes Adams Hill so beautiful and a wonderful place to live in. Now, as citizens and people who are working to pay our mortgages, we may not always be as vested in these kinds of meetings that we need to be, and that's unfortunate because we depend on the minds and the heart and spirit of people like you who put in place to speak for us. I would think we would look at things before we're looking at parking in alleys and putting parking structures in residential areas. I think we would look for an alternative to the no project planning here and figure out another way. a way that has a vision of a city that can incorporate some of California and less of Dubai. So for that, I just want to say I hope we really reconsider, because I completely reject this convoluted, well thought out academic plan for a city that has to live with people who currently own homes here, who have to get back and forth to work, who are stuck in the traffic and have to deal with the realities of the everyday life in Glendale. And I don't see any of that here. I see it being dismissed, especially when we're talking about people who can't make it here writing in letters, and then they're being like kind of dismissed and disrespectfully looked at as like just people who don't want change. Maybe change comes in other alternatives that don't require so much work and so much manpower and thought put in. And my suggestion would be not to be so assigned to what you've research shows, and maybe also consider some of the people who live here.
So, ma'am, let me ask you a question, and thank you very much for your comments. What part of City of Glendale exactly looks like Dubai?
I think that just when I say that, I mean that there's this enormous amount of construction and great growth. But I've been living in Glendale for 10 years, and when I came here, it was this beautiful part of California, and almost like Burbank, a different, I guess you would call it mixed use. And I went away for 2 years on a job, and I came back, and it's just all, I don't even recognize that there's so much building of all the apartments and stuff, and there isn't a lot of greenery. There's a lot of shopping and a lot of beautiful, I love the brand. I love when I get depressed, I go there and walk around. I feel like it's a beautiful place. But where is the place for the community? Where are the parks? Where are the things that those places offer? That's the duality of Dubai. You have this beautiful front end, and then, we have in South Glendale, where I live, we have Forest Lawn, the hospital now, which we're concerned about what that will be like, and we have the city, the cars there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Susan Wolfson.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. The staff report for today's hearing on the South Glendale Community Plan indicates that the no project alternative is the only option that mitigates significant and unavoidable environmental impacts. Shouldn't this alone put the brakes on this? There are too many significant and unavoidable impacts. The EIR identifies such impacts in 6 out of 16, or 37.5%, of environmental topics considered, including air quality and greenhouse gas emission impacts great enough to raise objections from the South Coast Air Quality Management District. The city is already experiencing difficulties from existing density, since the evaluations for prior projects were inadequate to prevent traffic circulation problems, insufficient parks, and unaffordable rents, just to mention 3 examples. Why would we expect otherwise from this mountain of rationalization? The great question raised by so much of what transpires is, why are we doing this? Why do we need more than 10,000 more units and 28,000 more residents? Whose interests are served? If we are bending over to appease outside interests, say, for example, pressures from developers, shouldn't our first loyalties be to ourselves? If I'm not for myself, who am I for? Substantial population growth in the city will result in increased need for police, fire, and other emergency resources. We are already short of these resources, hard-pressed to finance and even recruit additional public safety personnel. This plan will only exacerbate the situation. Our greatest consideration should be current Glendale residents. Their concerns and wishes should come first, before those of developers, consultants, and even governmental agencies. This nation is based on government, by the people and for the people. I interpret the people to mean individual residents. One final question. I noticed the inserted zoning change to civic for GUSD properties. Why is this being done? Why now? If it opens the door to future additional overbuilding, we vigorously object. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So, let us go back to staff and ask questions if we have. If not, then I will close the public hearing and start the deliberation. Any questions from staff? Commissioner Minigan.
I'm going to ask this question from the staff because I'm going to ask, Sorry about that. I'm going to ask this question from the staff because then I'm going to ask this question from the commission members as well. The last speaker asked it. It's a very simple one. Why are we doing this? In the sense that when I'm looking at the EIR, and if we put it into effect, we can anticipate, we will not guarantee, but we can anticipate with certain amount of statistical confidence, I'm sure, a certain amount of growth in our city. 28,000 people. If we do nothing, we will increase. In other words, the natural flow, the natural momentum of our city as is will result in 7,000 increase in population. So the question arises, if as a resident of the city of Glendale, I apologize. So why are we doing this again?
We have a South Glendale community plan as a way to address growth that's happening in the future. Not all the growth that we've planned for is growth that comes from us. So when you look at it in terms of having a transit-oriented plan, when you look at all the different projects that are around us that are built in the actual project, that would be expansion of the MetroLink, expansion of the Metro projects, the Metro grants that go through BRT, expansion of our own population. How do you move people in the city when we know we're having natural increase? We have pressures coming in from all our surrounding cities. They're also growing. People come to Glendale. We have centers here that people come to shop. So we attract growth that's not even in Glendale. We attract people to come in during the day. How do we address that? Because we know it's going to happen. We know the growth is going to occur, and it's not addressed in our current documents. So the reason we're looking at this is because we know transit is going to be huge for us. Metro's very concerned with it. That's why they gave us money to go do a Tropico Center plan. How are we going to deal with that growth? We realize that South Glendale and that Tropico plan is really only very South Glendale, but we know those pressures don't stop at Glendale. They're going to go up all the different roadways through Glendale, out into Burbank and Pasadena. How are we going to coordinate ourselves at a regional level? Because that's where we're stuck in. We have a city that's in the middle with regional pressures on us, and a lot of those growth plans, the transit plans, they're not Glendale's, but we need to react to them. And so that's why we have a plan where it's like, well, what happens? What happens if we know all these plans are coming in, they're going to affect us? Do we maximize growth, put it along those transit corridors? What would it look like? What would the impacts be? Or is this growth that we can't address? So in terms of a study, that's exactly what this is. This is studying how are we going to grow in the future? Because our density is going to go up. Whether we address it or not, those impacts are going to impact on Glendale. You know, these are regional pressures. We're part of the region. The growth is going to occur. What's going to happen to us? We've already seen what happens when you don't build enough housing, what happens to housing rents when we have shortages. We've seen what happens when we have, you just can't build roads enough to move all the traffic. So what alternatives do we look for? And so really that's what the heart of this plan came from. We definitely know Metro's worried about it. They gave us money to do a Tropico Center study. We said it's not enough just to look at having some of those policies for transit in South Glendale, just in the Tropico. That's why we expanded them along the corridors. And if you're going to grow, where should you grow? Do you grow in the residential neighborhoods? Do you grow on a corridor where you have transportation available? Do you plan for that transportation to be expanded in the future? We felt, yeah, let's study that. That's what we need to study because, like you're saying, natural increase happens, growth happens. Where do you put these people? And again, a lot of that growth isn't necessarily in Glendale, but we're certainly going to experience it just because you have ambient growth that's going to press on us. If we want to have a mall, we want to have people shopping in Glendale, we want to have businesses, we have a downtown. How do we get people in and out of that? How do we make it attractive for business purposes? How do we make it attractive for the hospitals to stay here? How do we provide for their expanded growth? There's more and more pressure to do more and more on the same pieces of land that we have now. Well, to move people in and out, you're going to have mobility pressure. You can't build the road. How do you get people in and out? How do we address it? And Yeah, there are absolutely, there are significant impacts, and that's exactly what this environmental document shows. But it doesn't mean that if we don't address it, it's not going to occur. So we need to have a strategy for addressing it. And whether that strategy means we bump up density or not, that's a different question. But when you take a look at these policies, a lot of them are not related to growth. Like as Chris said, went through the individual neighborhoods. A lot of them are really quality of life issues. How do we make the streets safer so we can walk on them, realizing growth will occur? How do we get people in and out of the neighborhoods? How do we accommodate parking? Absolutely, parking is stressed. The state went and took it out of the environmental review. That wasn't something that was done by Glendale. That was by state law. They yanked parking out because they said, you know what, everybody's going to have more parking problems. That was acknowledged by the state. So our goal is just to acknowledge that these are happening, come up with strategies for how do we address it. And we looked at it's pointed out by the neighborhoods, we pointed out a very aggressive plan. That is what we studied. But as you can see, even as we have different stages, maybe we don't want the most aggressive, maybe we want a different pattern of growth. And absolutely what we heard from the public is, and you've met numerous letters that you've seen it, you've heard them testify, there's not an interest in having more units. So if there's not an interest in the public to having more units, how are you going to accommodate the growth? How are we going to deal with it? And it's a struggle, and that's exactly why we created an environmental document. And as you can see by the environmental impact report, growth itself is going to have impacts. And how are we going to plan for that?
Okay, so would it be fair to characterize the program EIR as being able to absorb? Because the way you've written it, it sounds like the plan, the implementation of the plan will result in 27,910 increase in population. But what you just said sounds like if we have this plan in place, we will be able to absorb this level of growth in a mindful, rational, thought-out way.
Let me see if I can approach it from a different, maybe take a jump up to 30,000 feet. We have a general plan that has very broad and very vague direction of places where we want to go. And we have specific zoning for each parcel. But we don't have anything in between that tells you the policies. Here's this broad area. There's the policy. Here's how we want you to do things in these areas. Here's how we want you to do things in those areas. So the plan itself is a vision, if you will. It's to tell you how. It's a policy document that says these are the reasons why we want you to do things this way. Now, when we look at growth, we identified a project and said, let's look at the sites, and in 25 years, what kind of development do we expect would happen if we made these changes? And those changes are based on transit. So right now, we're not asking to do anything except for in the TODs, the tropical zone. But really, no zoning change. But as we add layers of transit, what would happen if you were to increase the density? Because now you can carry more people because you've got the transit. What would happen? What would happen if you put another line in and you increase the density? So the plan does a couple of things. It tells you those policies, why we want things to happen, even if there's no growth, even if you have the no project alternative. But if you wanted to do that, how would you do it? And that's where the plan comes into place. Again, remember, plan. It's not a project that we're approving. It's not density that's coming on. It is a plan to say, if we were going to do higher density, don't do it until you have transit that can carry it. Any growth is going to have impacts. If we do nothing, we will have impacts. And so this is really laying out how do you deal with those impacts and how do you grow. That's the purpose of the plan.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have, well, any staff members, just further question on this alternative two. Right now you have moratorium on the build out of the downtown area. So if you look at this alternative two, it includes the downtown and the tropical center. So if that moratorium remains in place, then all this alternative two is really allowing tropical center to be built out. Am I correct? Now, later on, if council or our planning staff comes back and takes a look at this thing here and says, hey, you know what, we have to address this issue, and then maybe we'll take a look at the downtown growth again. But where it is right now, because you asked us not to look at DSP, and so without the DSP, alternative two is just tropical center mainly. Is that correct?
That's correct. It would be the corridor that would be on Central. We would be looking at putting MX3 on that, and then as well as the Tropico Center.
Okay, thank you.
I kind of wanted to maybe also add something to the explanation. So if we do certify the EIR, it does not mean, and again, you guys can jump in if I'm giving wrong information. From what I understand, if you certify the EIR, that doesn't mean that the plan is approved. That means in the future, if we do make any changes, we have this EIR in place that shows what the impact will be. We can certify the EIR and one by one go and either approve or disapprove all the other items that are on in there. But what the EIR will do is will allow the city to either adopt no project or whatever project they'll have later on to use that EIR.
If I understand correctly, I think they also want us to bless the tropical center.
That's correct, but that's what I was trying to say. And I'm just going to kind of talk about this. I took a lot of notes, so I'm going to look and talk. And the director just mentioned we have the general plan, and then we have specific plans that support the goal and the objectives and of the general plan. So a specific plan actually implements the goals of the general plan. But the issue for our city is, and actually this goes to some of the speakers that spoke about open space, and they spoke about lack of services in schools. Our general plan is outdated. It needs to be updated. It's absolutely outdated. Our land use element is over 20 years old. So our policies are old. Our goals and policies for our land use element is old. So we are having a specific plan supporting a very old plan. It should be the other way. We should first have a general plan update, or we should update our land use element, and talking to my colleagues, before we go in and have a specific plan. Because that way we'll be able to actually look at what needs to be done, and then later on go and look at the specific areas and kind of try to fix the issues. So that's one thing. So if we don't have the big picture, we can't just put a band-aid on the little things and try to fix it. So my understanding is our general plan, or our land use element, was last updated back in about 20 years ago. And my understanding is that the circulation element is going to be updated next year. I think we should ask council to actually take a look at land use element. And I actually encourage the public to go and speak to council as well to get this land use element updated as well. Land use element and circulation element go hand in hand always. And I think according to the OPR, which is the Office of Planning and Research, that's what they want. They want the land use element and the circulation element to work together. If we have that in place, then we can go in and have specific plans that go well with our land use element.
Do you have any questions for them? Before we go to deliberation.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were deliberating.
No.
So that's no question. Sorry, I literally jumped into
We enjoyed
deliberation.
We enjoyed hearing you.
I still have more, so maybe we can.
So at deliberation, if you have any other questions.
I have no questions. I'm actually deliberating, I guess, at this point.
We have certain questions.
Yes, please go ahead. Then I'll
Commissioner
continue.
Citrian, do you have any questions for?
Well, maybe in the next stage on deliberating,
Yes.
because still I have a question about some of the comments that was made by.
Well, this is the time to ask them.
Parking Commission, that even they brought up this concern about the traffic. Oh, excuse me. I think the concern I have about is traffic and increasing population and increasing more units. To me, it's not going to help to solve any of those problems. And by reading and listening to some of the comments that was made here, and also reading comments was made from Transportation and Parking Commission, that even they brought up these questions. And they're saying if existing land uses results in a significant traffic impact that cannot be mitigated, then adding additional units will not solve the problem. And there is no guarantee that people are going to use the transit and driving their cars. So the problem is going to go bigger and bigger, and not that we're solving. So I just want to repeat my concern that I made, that I can see that we already have all these traffic problems. And then during these last 2 years, we had all these new 7, 8 floor buildings, all this construction that was made, that even I heard that probably not all of them it's been occupied. So there are so empty units there that people are going to come just because of that. If, let's say, if they can occupy 100% of all those newly constructed.
Any questions for the staff?
So
I know we are exuberant about deliberation.
So my question is that my answer to my question, I still couldn't get it. So I still have that problem in my mind.
Do you have an answer that would be satiating to Commissioner Zatorian?
I don't know if it's satiating, but again, the traffic in acknowledge that the EIR tells you if you do nothing, you will still have significant impacts and you'll have traffic.
Yeah.
Some of the policies that we have outlined here will help with that, or at least make it palatable. So if density is the issue for you, and you think that that is what's creating all the problem, you know, we would still want you to recommend to the council the plan itself, but don't move forward with density. Again, with the exception of the TOD area, because it's important, tied to our grant. We would say don't do any of that. But the policies and the direction and the plan, the vision, they're all still valid, whether we do any increase in density or any change in density at all. They're still valid.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions for you folks.
One moment. Did you get your answer? Because I was going to add something if you didn't get your answer.
No, I think it's the same answer.
Okay, so basically at the end of the day, there will be impact. There will be traffic impact no matter. And on some of those, we can mitigate it at the end of the day. And on some of those, we can mitigate it even if we have the no project. So I think that's the question you were.
Yeah, but then we have 7,000 versus 28,000.
Correct.
So if we can mitigate that, is it going to be for the 7,000 or for 28,000?
So overall,
depends on your decision.
Yeah, so again, no project or complete build out, there's some mitigation, there's some impacts that we will not be able to mitigate, period. There will be so much impact and the city won't be able to do anything. So that is what basically the IR and the study showed. Okay. So the city won't be able to do anything about it.
Question for staff. I'd like for Randy Stevenson question about the Pacific Edison corridor. Is there an explanation that by reducing the zoning, in a sense you're killing the golden goose, so to say, if what you're looking for?
We don't disagree with him. He's exactly right. We would be taking a density down. But the way it was looked at in terms of urban design is perhaps it was too tall, and the density the way it was, the way it is right now under the code, perhaps it's too tall and allows too much development in an area.
But his suggestion was to save the zoning the way it is, if you want to get that transformation, yes?
Right. And I mean, he's not wrong.
Got it. Okay. You know, it's Ms. Vartanian talked about the no project alternative, basically, and that the adoption of higher density would not be that terrific. And I think how would you answer the question that while you have put a moratorium in this city, in downtown specific plan, on one hand, and then you're encouraging, or at least envisioning the encouragement, I can't get any more anodyne than this, right, of higher density on the other hand. How would you, isn't that an oxymoron?
Not necessarily. There's a couple of things. We hit a ceiling on what we studied, not necessarily what could be built, the capacity of downtown. We hit a ceiling on what we studied in the downtown specific area. So really, this plan is about much more than the downtown specific plan area. A couple of things came up in the council's conversation. Inclusionary housing. Should we stop development in the DSP area until we really decide on inclusionary housing? That was at least one council member's idea. That's a valid idea, because if you allow projects to move forward today before you can get inclusionary housing in place, you lose all those affordable units. Some of the council was concerned about aesthetic. Some of the council was concerned about the speed that development took place, and do we really understand what those impacts are? Well, when you look at this EIR, we're studying all of that. We're studying conditions today. When we looked at it in 2006, we were projecting forward and saying, this is what we think is going to happen. Today we know in the DSP area, so that's why this study has some validity to it. I guess the last point I would make is this is a 24-year plan, 24, 25-year plan. We're stretching out that far. The moratorium is another 10 months. At most, another 22 months, because you can extend for a year. And then we're going to see development take place again. I would venture to guess that there isn't anything that would happen under this plan if we were to, I almost made the same mistake. I'm not sure there's anything that would happen that is envisioned by this plan, because then you've got to do some implementing zoning to make that thing happen within the next 22 months. So those two things, they're not incongruous. They can run together, and in fact, the timing will be unaffected.
Thank you. Appreciate it. If there are no other questions from staff, I have a question from the attorney, and then we can close the public hearing and, not the public hearing, but start the deliberation. Close it. All right. So we're ready for deliberation. Any comments? Anyone wants to start?
I think she was in the middle of her deliberation.
I know. And she was doing
Sorry,
a great job.
I made a mistake, and I thought we were deliberating. So, I guess what I was trying to say is, in order for us to have a specific plan that's going to work, and I'm pro-growth, but this is not the right way to go. We need to have our general plan and specifically our land use element updated. I actually asked our colleagues that maybe that could be one of the recommendations that we can give to council to look at a possibility of a budget to bring in the land use element up to code. A few other things that I wanted to talk about. I think we should, as staff was earlier speaking, we should adopt a tropical center plan and from that point, we should look into current zones that we have in the city. In some areas, we don't have to necessarily have a density, like actually expand the density, but the current zonings that we have, if we actually look at them and study them further, we might be able to use those to develop and further possible projects in the future. Maybe go out there, do some studies, and then come back and speak with the council and come back here and maybe we can have some actually study sessions to understand what is out there. Definitely get involved with the community and this is too fast, too quick. And I don't think this is the way we should go, especially since, again, our general plan and land use element are completely outdated. Those are a few things I wanted to say. I think there's more I might talk about, but that would be my recommendation.
Sure. Any other commissioner?
Well, I'll go. I'm kind of in agreement with Commissioner Sebastian's comment. And I know that when staff was making suggestions, and that's why I wanted to find out what that tropical center by itself, what type of effect, it was going to bring. And yes, we need to have a general plan amended. Then take a look at, that is the right order to do it. So I'm in agreement that, I think we should be recommending that strongly to that. But in today's, our, role to certify the final EIR study and also to adopt this tropical center of what the impact that tropical center will bring. I feel comfortable enough to do, go that far to do that. So I think that's what you are leading to, and I'm in a mood to support that.
That's and I kind of lost the train of thought where I was, but that's what I was going to say. And I was going to say we need to certify the final EIR, adopt a tropical center plan, and then from there have the staff actually go and look further for projects. We can't just jump into this. It's, again, too fast, too quick, and we need to have some, come back to us, and we need to do some study sessions to understand this better than just quickly jump into it and just recommend the complete plan to the council.
One of the asks is that South Glendale Community Plan to be adopted, for us to recommend the adoption of it. So when...
Well, I would say adoption or modifications. We're
modifications
seeking,
along
exactly. So exactly like what Commissioner Shahbazian said, that's very useful to us if we know that at least there's some support for the Tropico area. What I'm hearing is a lot of hesitancy with our corridors and what does that mean for the zoning and what does that mean for the density, because we're not bringing proposed zoning to you. We're just bringing a parameter to you. So it's absolutely acceptable to give direction to us saying, okay, there needs to be more study on this. We're fine with the concept of perhaps the final EIR and the Tropico Center, but we would want direction then to council. Council, you need to study this more. Give us direction to have staff come. What does the zoning actually mean? Come back with the draft zoning. We could tell you exactly what it would be on a corridor, so there's better understanding of what that impact could be. I think that's what I'm hearing, is that there's still a lot of uncertainty because this is a 30,000 foot type level document. It's a program EIR. It's not project, and what we normally see is project, where you actually have the zoning in front of you. Okay, this is what it means for these lots. We don't have that level of details for you, and I think what I'm hearing is there's some uncertainty, especially with the public, that what does that really mean, for my lot, not just for the area, but my property. And so we could come back to you with that information.
Yes, and then as you guys come back, we do study sessions when we learn more about what needs to be or what can be done.
And we can come back and we have ability to modify this document whichever way you would direct. So right now it includes a proposal to increase the densities, to create new multifamily zones that have an increase in dwelling units per acre, an increase in height. We can modify this if you give us direction that you don't perhaps at this time want to look at any increase in density. We can certainly modify this too. The policies, the vast majority of these policies are not related to density. They're related to how you experience the neighborhood. So it's relatively simple for us then to modify and basically have a lesser project than what the project was that was reviewed in the EIR. And obviously we have two alternatives that were reviewed in the EIR. If you pick an alternative that's a lesser impact, we can certainly, once an EIR is certified, we could use that document to still adopt something that would be even less impact than alternative 2 or alternative 3.
And just curious. At that point, would that come back to Planning Commission for the community to have feedback?
Well, it would go to council, and council would give us that direction, but absolutely, that could be part of your recommendation, absolutely.
Commissioner Manukian?
From what I heard between the two commissioners, we have something in the works in terms of motion. So if you're willing to.
I'm not sure if if anyone else wants to actually.
Well, there are several
voice.
motions here. But,
No, I know.
But the direction
this would be completely different than
at least two have towards the TOD, and basically that's where we're at.
That's
and
it.
with the recommendation that the general plan needs to be updated and.
Yeah, if I get support, I would.
Before this is.
No, I mean, updating the general plan is going to be very pricey and it's going to take a while. My recommendation would be the land use element, definitely, because that's something that affects this department and this plan and any specific plan. The general plan, it would be great if it's updated. And the general plan basically talks about open space, talks about everything that we have talked about. So it talks about open space, it talks about circulation element, it talks about land use element, parks,
conservation, noise, mobility.
Do we have view sheds?
No.
No, we don't.
Not yet.
So, all of that in all together, it kind of ties everything together, and we are absolutely updated on that. I don't know if we have budget for that. I would love to actually recommend that, but
Well, that could
maybe
be a
we could.
recommendation from a
We
commissioner.
we can recommend that. Plus, if they can't do that, definitely the land
In other
use
words-
element.
In other words, in order to be able to achieve both sides, assuming there is going to be votes,
Yes.
we can adopt the TOD with the tropical and so forth, and certify the EIR with the recommendation as an aside to the council to go ahead and do whether it is the updating of the land use or what have you. So
And one, I'm sorry.
No, I was just asking, is there a separate language here for motion for just approving the tropical
Yeah.
center?
It's.
I know you have several
There are
things.
several motions, yes.
Motions.
Yeah,
But we're not there
it's
yet.
a recommendation. Like all the actions you would be taking would be recommending to council to take those actions. But
But we're
yeah,
not
and they're all
there yet.
motions.
We still have 3 commissioners that need to.
And may I just add to that, one other thing would be the land use element. If, let's say, we don't have the budget to go ahead with the general plan update, which again will be a very long process to completely do that, the land use element of the general plan to be updated with the circulation element, which I believe is going to be next year. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Yes?
there is a budget item right now that's been approved for next year's budget to update the circulation element, but at this time it does not include the land use element, although a lot of the work that goes into the circulation
Yes.
element is exactly what you need to update a land use.
So in a big picture, actually, the city would save some money because they would have to do public outreach once for both elements rather than.
Yeah, if you ran them both at the same time, then you could have public outreach that would cover for both. Otherwise, each element will have its own outreach depending on how, if they're combined together, then you can save money on the outreach. But if they're done separately, well, then you have separate outreach for each one.
All right. Commissioner Manukian, your train of thought as far as deliberation is concerned.
You guys have blown up my train of thought so many times. I have no comments at this time.
Very good. Commissioner Satorian? No comments. All right. So I have several recommendations as an aside, or it could be part of it. I believe very strongly that inclusionary housing is exactly what is needed, whether it is the no project or the alternative to. And I don't know how you are going to be addressing that. Affordable housing of its utmost importance, and that's exactly what we need in the city of Glendale. By that, there has to be absolute certain AMI definitions. In other words, this generalizations about workforce housing at 120% of AMI should not be tolerated if we want to be able to address affordable housing. And it's pure and simple. That's the first comment that I have on that. Secondly, when this was before us last time, I had asked for this planning department to, because this historical survey was something brand new, to let the affected folks with their properties be aware or be brought up to speed on how that survey addendum or amendment affects them. I don't know if that's been done, but that definitely needs to go into the consideration. Look, the idea of putting the cart before the horse is what is upsetting a lot of people here. If we had enough parks, by the way, on the no project level, we're still short hundreds of acres of parks, right? And the chances that this council or this city will go out and find 10, 15, 20 acre parkland in the middle of downtown or in South Glendale, it's slim to none. Instead, I believe that our council or our city needs to look at parkland with a different twist. We need to start thinking about pocket parks. One of the most successful ones that this city has is the one that is on the corner of Wilson and Adams. You need to be able to, if you want a little bit of density, whether it's the no project or between the no project and the 5,000 or whatever, South Glendale is park starved. That needs to be addressed, right? Now, what I'm about to say may not be palatable, because eventually what comes down to is very simple. We have to put the money, our money, where our mouth is. Is there going to be an appetite for the citizens of the city of Glendale, as they did with bond financing with GUSD or Glendale Community College? Would there be appetite to be able to do that? Create parks and parkings? Who knows? I don't know. That's something that needs to be discussed and looked into it. What is for certain is that we can't, this is an opportunity, and I agree with Commissioner Shabazian, that this is the time that if you visit the land use elements, you will have a better product because of it, right? But I am certain in my heart of hearts that unless we address this park issue and the traffic issue, we're never going to be able to do it anymore. And it is time for us to have the political will as well as the citizens' participation. You see, it's easy for me to say I want parks, right? But if there is no budget and this idea, well, cut it from somewhere else so we can build parks, it hasn't worked for the past 25 years. And we got to look at this with a fresh set of eyes. So those are my comments. With that, now, what is the recommendation? Do we start taking the motions one at a time? Ms. Stutler?
I believe that might be the easiest way, just to make sure that we don't skip an entitlement. Yes, I believe that would be the easiest way, as long as we don't skip an entitlement.
All right, so the first motion is the zoning map amendment, case number PZC, right? Anybody wants to read that in, make that motion?
Mr. Chair,
Oh, it would be the EIR.
Commission. It would be a recommendation concerning the EIR.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Certification
Okay.
of the EIR.
So, anybody wants to make the motion?
I'm sorry, which one was this? This is to actually certify the final EIR?
No, it's a recommendation concerning certification of the EIR to the City Council.
Okay, so I'll make that motion. I have to read the entire thing?
No.
Not the entire thing.
No.
You can read the headline.
All right, so it's the Planning Commission motion certifying the final environmental impact report EIR for the South Glendale Community Plan project and modifying the Tropical Center plan to match the South Glendale Community Plan policies and implement the transit-oriented development zoning.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please. Sorry, discussion? No, go ahead.
Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Manukian?
Aye.
Commissioner Sartorian?
Aye.
Commissioner Shabazian?
Aye.
And Chair Astorian?
Aye.
Motion passes.
The second one? No, first one. This first one. Now, who's going to take the second?
And this, I just want to say that the second one is related to,
Laura, do you want to do this in the order that's set forth on page 40 of your PowerPoint, or do you want to take the motions as they are attached to the staff report?
Because that's the way we have it. That's how I'm.
oh, as it is in the staff report?
Yes, the recommended actions that are right in front of you on the screen.
I think it might be easier just to take it as they are on the screen, just because I can't find
Okay.
the topics fast enough on the motions. The next one would be, well, we've done number 1 and 2, certify the final EIR, and there's a recommendation as part of that to also amend pages and adopt the Tropico Center. So the next one would be adopt the South Glendale Community Plan or alternative with modifications. If you'd like, I can tell you some of the modifications that I've heard come from the commission. Whether or not there's agreement, I don't know, but the modifications that I've heard is there's a discussion about perhaps adopting the TOD as making a recommendation on pursuing the TOD as proposed, but perhaps not pursuing the rest of the density that's proposed until a future date when we can come back with a study that actually talks about in the future, what do we mean about the densities that would be proposed in their mixed-use areas. So we can come back to you then or modify this plan related to our mixed use, and that would be our corridors. That's where the majority of growth is proposed. So if we were looking at, perhaps if you're making a recommendation on alternative 2, then the area that we're looking at the additional growth would be proposed along Central, our mixed use on Central, or mixed use on San Fernando Road, our mixed use on on Broadway East and West, and on Colorado East and West. That would be what our
Which motion is that?
I think it's what she actually just read, correct? Because we are changing the motion.
So it's the second one, actually, yeah.
Right, so that's what that's kind of what I've heard
Yes.
come from the commission. And if
So that's RGPA 1220635.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So
except
that's
there
what-
are some changes to it.
Right.
Yes.
And we got the changes.
So with that language that
Laura just read.
Laura, Mrs. Stadler just read off, I make the motion to.
okay.
adopt,
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Manukian,
Aye.
Commissioner Sartorian,
Aye.
Commissioner Shabazian,
Aye.
Chair Astorian.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
That
correct.
one.
Correct,
That's correct.
as amended.
1-8. So the next one is.
And the next one would be related to the land use element. And my suggestion would be that since we have amendments to the South Glendale Community Plan document, that we would, your direction to us, or actually your recommendation to council would be that we look at making the similar amendments to the South Glendale Community Plan changes that are in the land use element itself.
With the comments that we made.
With the comments, exactly.
And this one is RGPA 1800448.
445.
PGP.
445.
445.
PGP.
PGPA, I'm sorry. Okay. So does somebody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
We have a motion and a second. That would be to adopt the land use element text amendment as modified to match the recommendation of the South Glendale Community Plan. Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Manukian?
Aye.
Commissioner Sartorian?
Aye.
Commissioner Shabazian?
Aye.
Chair Astorian?
Yes.
Okay, passes.
Laura, I'm sorry, I have a question. So these all the other ones that we're going to read, they're all going to be altered with all the recommended. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And then the last one we would recommend that we take no action on the circulation element, take no action on the DSP boundary amendments. And then the last one would be what would be a recommendation on the C3 zone change. And that would also be C3 zone change. And then we also have one lot that would actually be going from community services to R1250 zone residential, and then land use would be high-density residential, matching what's already built on those sites.
Which one? PGPA?
Number 6, I think.
No. The PGPA number.
It's
448.
448. The very last page.
Okay. So is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
A second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Commissioner Manukian?
Aye.
Commissioner Sartorius?
Aye.
Commissioner Shabazi?
Aye.
And Chair Astorian?
Yes.
Passes.
So these ones are not, they're not in this thing, right? No, this.
Okay, and then I believe that's all of the actions that we have related to the South Glendale Community Plan.
Okay, now, are we going to see all of these items that we have voted on before it goes to council just one more time? Or do you anticipate going to council within the next 2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, we're currently scheduled to go before the city council with your recommendations on July 17th. So what would come back to you is any modifications that the city council would then make to any land use designations, zoning designations, general plan amendments. Those would all come back to you and then go back to city council, essentially. So you'll get to see these again once council deliberates on the proposal.
We're not going to have, there's no planning commission meeting until then?
That's exactly. Do we have one between now and then? That it can come back and for us to review it?
I know we generally don't have one generally don't have one when we have the 4th of July weekend. And I don't have the calendar in front of me. If it's
Ms. Stubler.
July is
Yeah.
it's the first and third Wednesdays, and so the first Wednesday in July is July 4th.
Oh.
Yeah, but we have one. We do have a regularly scheduled meeting on the 18th, but it would be after we would go to council. All right, we'd be the council on the 17th, and your regularly scheduled meeting would be the 18th.
I want to hear what Commissioner Manukian's point is that we like to see the comments, the language as it's been
In the motions?
right.
In the motions.
The recommendations from this body.
Do you want to take a recess right now and write them up?
We can do that.
Yeah, we could do that.
If you would like to see that, we can certainly do that for you.
You can write them up and communicate them to us, can't you?
All we need-
Well, if we write them up and send them to you, then the public wouldn't have an opportunity to see it. I mean, they would see it when we went to council, but they wouldn't have an opportunity before it goes to council, and you wouldn't necessarily have an opportunity to make any changes before we went to council.
So this thing is going to be rushed right now. I mean, taking 5 minutes and writing down this stuff is not kosher. No?
Well,
What's your preference?
Would it be maybe having a special meeting again on the second Wednesday? Is that an option?
I don't think we would have time to notice it right now.
Okay.
And there's not enough time to get
Do
out.
we have the option to have a closed meeting and being broadcast? I'm not sure if that's
Mr.
okay.
Chair, for the time restrictions and all that, I think, it it helps us to spend a little more time and then make a decision on this.
So how long do you need?
15, 20 minutes?
Roughly.
Okay. So it is 20 minutes to 7?
To 8.
To 8? So 5 off. This body is in
I have
recess.
one question, sorry, before
Not
you.
yet. What?
Just want to make sure, are we going to include the language that we had about the land use element and the general plan?
Everything that we've talked as
Okay.
recommended.
that was your
Perfect.
discussion.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank
We are
you.
in recess.
Okay.
Thanks.
And so we are back from the recess for the Planning Commission meeting for the 25th. And what we have in front of us are the motions reflecting the comments and the comments that the commissioners each had. There is one that I don't see. There was a speaker here that was talking about the Pacific Edison part, and the staff even agreed that we agree the zoning should not be touched in that area. So that needs to be done as a recommendation as well.
We can modify it. That should be in the South Glendale Community Plan number 7. We can add, and we could add, make no change to the zoning on for Pacific Edison.
There you go. And it's interesting that my dissertation about affordable housing and parks was not included here either.
May I ask a question? So that what Commissioner Asturian just suggested, Laura, that you're writing down, that's for which part was that for, I guess?
That was to address the comment by Mr. Stevenson related to the basically a downzone from IMUR to what we were proposing for the town center.
But
I thought
that was just one person's comment, but I don't think we
I don't think we voted. Yeah,
I don't know if that should be part of the.
I also agree.
The question was asked.
we need the
Mine
mics.
is on. My microphone is always on. The question was asked from the staff. In fact, staff agreed with it.
Correct.
That's why it's a recommendation.
Right.
The council can look at it and say, this is not only exclusive recommendation to one or two people. Any commissioner can add something to it, and it's up to the council to look at it and say yay or nay.
Correct, but I don't want that. I don't agree with that recommendation.
Well, then your
So
comment would be recommended.
I'm not sure how that would be addressed.
We can take another vote because this is a this is a planning commission recommendation coming on behalf of all the
Yes.
planning commissioners.
Correct.
So we would need to have at least 3 people agree with it to include it as part of the recommendation. So if you wanted to take
And maybe we could kind of quickly deliberate that. before.
that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So reason why I say is, as you explained earlier, I do agree that if we look at this as an urban design aspect, and if we do later on have the option to develop, this is going to be very massive, and it is going to intimidate pedestrians and kind of create that sense of walkability. So I think what is currently there, if it was to be adopted, should stay. That's
what the speaker was suggesting.
I think the speaker was suggesting that we keep it as is.
Yes.
Not change the zoning.
So,
Correct.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So, though, this motion has been it was made by me and then was seconded. So, in order for this to include, your comment in there, I believe that you need to make the proper motion. As you said, you get a support from 3 commissioners, then that'll be in there. But as is right now with the 6 conditions in there, I think we voted on it. Everybody was happy with that unanimously. So in order for us to change that, I think if you want to introduce another motion to replace this, I think that needs to be done properly.
Okay. I need to understand why is it that if the staff agreed with the speaker, that we agree, if you should not change this, why is it that we...
Mr. Chairman, the staff did not agree that if we change it, we are wrong or any of the sort. The speaker just made a conclusion based on analysis, and the staff agreed that yes, based on your analysis, your conclusion is correct, but not necessarily that what the staff had done was incorrect. I think there's a distinction there.
Okay. Yeah. I buy that. All right. Okay. Let's go forward.
All right. I guess my question would be, is somebody proposing an amendment to this motion as proposed and adopted?
I think we can craft a new motion to the effect that, to the extent that the EIR before the Planning Commission includes the change of zoning of certain properties, fill in the blank, it is the Planning Commission's recommendation that such a change of zoning not take place.
But that is, in my opinion, that's very specific.
Yeah,
We shouldn't go and specifically talk about this very small area. And in my opinion, based on one comment we had, we should leave this the way it is. And in the future, as we've said, you know, if there are going to be studies out there and they're going to come back with us with recommendations, at that point we'll be able to look further.
I agree with Commissioner's suggestion. We're going to take a look at this thing anyways.
We agreed to that.
You know, yeah. So if you leave it as is, then we're okay. But if you start including very specific areas, then I think we're buying ourselves up.
That's fine.
No, I agreed to the Edison Pacific, not to be left the way that the
Okay.
Yeah,
report
okay.
showed.
All right.
Okay.
So then I guess my question would be,
I agree.
Just leave it as is.
yeah, do you agree, if there's any concern with these motions as prepared, would you please let us know? If not, then let us know if these look like they're prepared to your satisfaction.
I have a quick question because I didn't get a chance to look at all of this.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that the two things that we approved were with the modifications were the certification of the final EIR and the adoption of the tropical center plan.
Only tropical center.
And only tropical.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, that's how it reads.
So
Well, actually, you have three with modifications. You have the final EIR with modifications to the Tropico Center. Those were adopted. Then you have the South Glendale Community Plan with modifications. And then we also made the same modifications that were made in the South Glendale Community Plan. We will address those in the land use element text amendment as well. So that's why when you look at these motions, you'll see we didn't go through and analyze what every single one would be. We just know, okay, we're modifying the South Glendale Community Plan. However that affects the land use element, we will modify that as well.
I think what Commissioner Sebastian was trying to clarify is that the very first one that we all agreed on had the original language had other TOD centers, you know, and all that. But you know, I think that language was taken out, and then you just now have Tropical Center and the EIR.
Yeah, that was our intent.
Yes.
Okay. So meaning this is not going further for the South Glendale Community Plan.
Yes, it is. But the only part is the TOD, with the tropical part that we are recommending, the alternative number
Yes.
2.
So only. I'm just trying to understand. So it's only tropical, nothing further, correct? I think
With everything else. But
Mr. Chair, members of the
Yeah,
Planning
looking
Commission,
Yes.
at the very bottom of that motion for the EIR, it says, and implementing the TOD development zoning Tropico. Okay, so that's the modifying the Tropico Center Plan to match and to implement that TOD.
Yeah, that's how I understand it. Okay.
All right.
I'm good.
Okay.
So do we take another vote or what?
No, we're done.
Well, no, we don't
adjourned.
need to,
We're
as
done.
long as we're just
All right,
satisfied
so
these are accurate.
item number 8, there is no Community Development Department updates?
No.
None. Comments from commissioners? As if we haven't had enough. And so we're adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.